The sapphire glowed like a cold blue eye against the cleaner's faded gray uniform, a mocking reminder of a funeral I had attended 3 years ago. That pendant, the Star of Sophia, was supposed to be resting in a velvet box inside my wife's locked safe. Or so she had sobbed to the police the night our home was supposedly ransacked. Seeing it now, dangling from the neck of a woman scrubbing the lobby floor of my own architectural firm, didn't just make my blood run cold. It made the last decade of my marriage feel like a carefully scripted play. I stood paralyzed near the glass elevators, the scent of floor wax suddenly suffocating, realizing that the woman I shared my bed with hadn't just lied about a robbery. She had systematically dismantled our history, piece by piece, right under my nose. I had always been a man who appreciated structural integrity. As an architect, I knew that if the foundation is cracked, the most beautiful skyscraper is nothing more than a vertical tomb. For 12 years, I believed my marriage to Elena was my greatest achievement. We lived in a house I had designed myself, a sanctuary of glass, cedar, and warm light nestled on the outskirts of the city. Every morning began the same way: the hiss of the espresso machine, the soft rustle of the morning paper, and Elena, wrapped in a silk robe, pressing a kiss to my cheek. She smelled of expensive lilies and the vanilla cream she used, a scent that for years had meant home to me. "You're working too hard, Viktor," she would often say, her fingers lingering on my shoulders as I pored over blueprints. "The firm is successful. Masha is doing well in school. Why don't you take a weekend off? Let's go to the coast." She was the perfect partner, supportive, elegant, and seemingly content. Her mother, Tamara, lived in the guest house we'd built on our property. Tamara was a woman of soft smiles and sharp observations, the kind of mother-in-law who always seemed to be helping by organizing my filing cabinets or asking gentle, probing questions about our long-term investments. "Viktor, dear," Tamara had said just last week over Sunday brunch, her voice like honey poured over gravel. "I was reading about these new offshore trusts. So much safer for the family legacy, don't you think? Especially with the market being so volatile. We have to think about little Masha's future." I had laughed it off, touched by her grandmotherly concern. I had even given her a hug, smelling her medicinal tea and old-fashioned powder, never noticing the way her eyes darted toward the heavy oak door of my home office. I was the provider, the protector, the man who held the keys to a family trust that had been built over 3 generations. I trusted Elena with everything: my passwords, my bank accounts, my very soul. The Star of Sophia had been the center of our most traumatic memory. 3 years ago, while we were at a charity gala, our home had been burglarized. We returned to find the master bedroom turned upside down. Elena had collapsed on the floor, pointing to the empty jewelry box. The pendant, a 19th century sapphire heirloom that had belonged to my mother, was gone. I spent weeks holding her while she cried, guilt-ridden that I hadn't installed a better security system. The police never found the culprits, and eventually the insurance company paid out a claim that we used to start over, though Elena insisted she could never replace the sentimental value of that stone. "It was the last piece of your mother I had," she had whispered into my chest, her tears soaking my shirt. "I feel like I've lost her all over again." But standing in the lobby of my firm at 8:45 p.m., that narrative shattered. The cleaning lady, Maria, was a woman I had seen 100 times. She was a quiet shadow who moved through the halls after the architects went home. She was currently leaning over a bucket, her back to me, but as she stood up to wipe her brow, the pendant swung forward. It caught the harsh fluorescent light, throwing a brilliant, unmistakable blue spark across the marble floor. "Maria?" I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. She jumped, nearly knocking over her bucket of soapy water. "Oh, Mr. Volkov! I'm so sorry, I didn't know you were still in your office." I didn't hear her apology. My eyes were locked on her neck. The delicate gold filigree, the tiny diamond chips surrounding the central sapphire, it was unmistakable. There was a small, heart-shaped nick on the bottom prong that I had accidentally made with a pair of pliers when I was 10 years old, trying to clean it for my mother. "That's a beautiful necklace, Maria," I said, stepping closer. My heart was thumping against my ribs so hard it was painful. Maria's hand instinctively flew to her throat, her fingers covering the stone. A flash of pride, quickly followed by a flicker of hesitation, crossed her face. "Oh, this? It's... it's just a costume piece, sir. My benefactor gave it to me." "Your benefactor?" I asked, my blood beginning to simmer. Who would give a cleaner a piece of costume jewelry like that? Maria looked down at her shoes, her face flushing. "A very kind lady. I do some extra cleaning for her on the weekends, at her private apartment downtown. She said she was clearing out her old trinkets and told me this was just glass. But it makes me feel pretty, so I wear it." "What is this lady's name, Maria?" I pressed, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Maria hesitated, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. She told me not to mention her. She likes her privacy. She's very high society, you see." "Does she look like this?" I pulled out my phone and swiped to a photo of Elena from our last anniversary trip. Maria peeked at the screen, and her eyes widened. She didn't have to say a word. The recognition was written in the sudden trembling of her hands. I should get back to the third floor," Maria stammered, grabbing her mop. "I'm behind schedule." "Maria, wait!" I said, but she was already scurrying toward the service elevator. I stood in the silence of the lobby, the smell of lemon-scented floor wax now smelling like decay. Elena didn't have a private apartment downtown. We lived together in our custom-built house. We shared everything. Or so I had thought. My mind raced back through the last 3 years. The late nights she spent at her book club, the sudden spa retreats with her mother, the way our savings account seemed to be draining slightly faster than inflation should allow. I looked at the glass elevators, seeing my own reflection. I looked the same expensive suit, the same neatly trimmed beard. But the man in the reflection was a fool. I had been living in a house of cards, and a cleaning lady had just pulled the first one from the bottom. I didn't go back up to my office. I walked out into the cool night air, my mind a whirlwind of static and sapphire blue. I needed to know what else was lost that was currently sitting in a secret apartment downtown. And more importantly, I needed to know why my wife had staged a robbery to steal from herself. I drove home in a trance, the city lights blurring into long, jagged streaks of neon. Every red light felt like a personal insult, a delay in the reckoning that was now inevitable. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did, a masterpiece of modern architecture, glowing with a soft, inviting warmth. But as I stepped through the front door, the smell of lilies no longer felt like a welcome. It felt like the scent of a funeral parlor. Elena was in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a glass of red wine, her laptop balanced on her knees. Tamara sat across from her, knitting something small and pink for Masha. They looked like a portrait of domestic bliss. "You're late, darling," Elena said, not looking up from her screen. Her voice was melodious, rhythmic. "I was starting to think the office had finally swallowed you whole." "There was a situation with the cleaning crew," I said, my voice sounding tight even to my own ears. I watched her closely. Elena's fingers paused over the keyboard for a fraction of a second, so brief I would have missed it yesterday. "Oh? Nothing serious, I hope? Did someone break something?" "No," I replied, sitting down heavily in the armchair opposite her. "I just saw something I didn't expect to see. A piece of jewelry." Tamara's knitting needles stopped clicking. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. Elena finally looked up, her expression a mask of perfect, concerned curiosity. "Jewelry? In an architectural firm? That's strange." "It was a pendant," I continued, my eyes locked on hers. "Sapphire, gold filigree. It looked remarkably like the Star of Sophia." The color didn't drain from Elena's face. She was too good for that. Instead, she let out a soft, sad sigh and set her wineglass on the coffee table. "Oh, Victor, don't do that to yourself. I know how much you miss that piece, but you're seeing ghosts. There are thousands of sapphire pendants in this city. This one had a heart-shaped nick on the bottom prong, I said. Tamara let out a sharp, forced laugh. Victor, dear, you're exhausted. You're imagining details because you want it to be found. It's been 3 years. That stone is probably in a vault in Switzerland or broken down into smaller gems by now. Why don't you let me make you some tea? They were tag-teaming me, their voices weaving a web of rational explanations meant to make me feel like I was losing my mind. It was a dance they had clearly practiced. Maybe you're right, I lied, forced a smile, and stood up. I'm going to wash up. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to my study and locked the door. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I sat at my desk and opened my personal laptop, not the company one. A few months ago, I had installed a high-end security suite on our home network, mostly to protect my firm's blueprints from corporate espionage. It included a feature that logged the IP addresses and locations of any device synced to our shared cloud account. I had never used it to track Elena. I had never felt the need. My fingers trembled as I navigated to the device history tab. There it was, Elena's tablet. It had checked in 3 hours ago from an address downtown. Not her favorite boutique, not the gym, not Masha's school. It was an apartment complex on 4th Street, a place she had no reason to visit. I felt a surge of nausea. The betrayal wasn't just a theory anymore. It was a physical weight. I waited. I waited until the house went silent, until the rhythmic breathing of a sleeping household settled into the walls. Around 1 a.m., I crept out, took my car out of gear, and let it roll down the driveway before starting the engine. The downtown apartment building was a nondescript, mid-rise structure. I used the emergency master key I kept in my car, a tool for my job that I never thought I'd use for this. The lobby was empty. I took the stairs to the 4th floor, my pulse thundering in my ears like a drum. Unit 412. I stood before the door, the cold metal of the key in my hand. Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back to the lie and the lilies and the espresso, but the architect in me knew the foundation was gone. I turned the key. The door swung open into a small, immaculately decorated studio. It wasn't a love nest. There were no photos of another man, no second set of clothes. It was an office, a cold, clinical command center. I walked toward a sleek white desk in the corner. Resting on it was a thick, black, leather-bound expander file. My hands were shaking so violently I almost couldn't flip the latch. When I did, the world finally stopped spinning and turned to ice. Inside were the original titles to our house. Not copies, the originals I thought were in our bank's safe deposit box. Below them were bank statements from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, registered to a shell company called SOS Holdings. Star of Sophia. The balance was staggering, nearly $700,000, funneled out of my business accounts in small, miscellaneous increments over the last 5 years. But the final blow was at the bottom of the pile. It was a folder labeled Exit Strategy. Inside was a pre-signed divorce petition naming irreconcilable differences and emotional instability on my part as the grounds. Clipped to it was a copy of the police report from the robbery 3 years ago. In the margins, in Elena's elegant cursive handwriting, were notes. Insurance payout confirmed. Stone moved to Maria for safekeeping. Assets 60% liquidated. Finalized by June. I slumped into the desk chair, the air leaving my lungs in a ragged gasp. My wife and mother-in-law hadn't just been stealing from me, they had been harvesting my life. The robbery was a cash-out. The trust fund was a trap. They were waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger, to leave me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a reputation for being mentally unfit. The room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at the documents, the cold, hard proof of a decade-long con. I wasn't a husband. I was a resource. I was a project that had reached its completion date. A soft click came from the door. I froze. The light from the hallway spilled in, and a shadow stretched across the white rug. I turned my head slowly. Standing in the doorway, dressed in a trench coat over her silk pajamas, was Elena. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look guilty. She looked disappointed, like a teacher catching a student looking at the answer key. "You always were too curious for your own good, Victor," she said, her voice devoid of all the warmth she had used at dinner. "You just had to go and ruin the ending, didn't you?" Elena didn't move from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, crossing her arms with a chilling composure that made the woman I'd shared a bed with for 12 years vanish, replaced by a stranger with predatory eyes. The silence in the small apartment was heavy, vibrating with the sound of my own ragged breathing. "How long?" I managed to choke out. The words felt like shards of glass in my throat. "How long have you been planning to erase me?" Elena tilted her head, a small, mocking smile playing on her lips. "Planning to erase you? Oh, Victor, don't be so dramatic. I wasn't erasing you. I was just diversifying my interests. You're an architect. You should understand the importance of a backup structure." "A backup structure?" I stood up, the exit strategy folder clutched in my hand. "You stole my mother's heritage. You staged a home invasion that traumatized our daughter. Masha still has night terrors because of that night, and you did it for an insurance payout?" At the mention of Masha, a flicker of something passed over Elena's face, but it wasn't guilt. It was annoyance. "Masha is fine. She's a child, she'll forget. And that heritage was sitting in a safe doing nothing. It's currently funding a very comfortable future for us. One where I don't have to listen to you drone on about cantilevers and load-bearing walls for the rest of my life." The door behind her opened wider, and Tamara stepped in. She wasn't wearing her sweet grandmother mask anymore. Her face was set in a mask of cold pragmatism, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on the file in my hand. "He found the file, Elena," Tamara said, her voice devoid of its usual honey. "I told you 4th Street was too close to his office. You got sloppy." "I didn't get sloppy," Elena snapped, her composure finally cracking. "He saw the pendant on the help. Who could have predicted that the one woman who works for his firm would be the one Maria knows?" I looked from the daughter to the mother, the scale of the conspiracy finally sinking in. You both were in on it from the start. The offshore accounts, the miscellaneous business expenses. Tamara, I gave you a home. I treated you like my own mother." Tamara let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. "You treated me like a charity case, Victor, giving me the guest house like a servant's quarters. You have so much, and you're so incredibly stingy with it. We just took what we were owed for playing our parts so well." I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against the desk. My pulse was a deafening roar in my ears. "And the robbery? Who was the man in the mask, Elena? Who did you bring into our home to scare our daughter?" Elena shrugged, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "It was my cousin, Pavel. He needed the money, and he's very good at following instructions. He didn't even have a real gun, Victor. It was a prop. You were the one who made it traumatic by screaming and calling the police before we could find the jewelry hidden in the garden." "You sold my blueprints too," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "That's why the Morozov firm beat us to the bridge contract. That's why our proprietary designs showed up in the Dubai project. You weren't just stealing my past, you were sabotaging my future." Elena walked over to the small kitchenette and poured herself a glass of water, as calm as if we were discussing the weather. "Morozov paid very well. More than you've given me in allowance for 3 years. Honestly, Victor, if you were better at business, I wouldn't have had to be." "This is over," I said, my voice shaking with a cold, burgeoning rage. "I'm calling the police. I have everything right here. The titles, the bank statements, the confession about the insurance fraud." I reached for my phone, but Elena was faster. She didn't try to grab it. She just looked at me with a terrifyingly calm expression. "Go ahead," she said. "Call them. But before the first siren reaches this block, I'll call my lawyer. And I'll tell him exactly where to find the evidence of your little habit." I paused, my thumb hovering over the screen. "What habit? I don't have any habits, Elena. You do now, she whispered, stepping closer. Her scent, lilies and vanilla, now smelled like poison. I've been making small, regular transfers from your business account to a known dealer's crypto wallet for 18 months. There's a bag of supplements hidden in the lining of your laptop bag, the one you take to every client meeting. If I go down for fraud, you go down for possession and distribution. Who do you think the courts will give Masha to then? A grieving mother or a drug-addicted architect? The world seemed to tilt. My legs felt like they were made of water. She had thought of everything. She hadn't just built a cage, she had wired it with explosives. You wouldn't, I whispered. You wouldn't take her away from me like that. I'll do whatever I have to do to protect my interests, Elena said, her eyes dead. Now, put the phone down. We're going to sit here, and we're going to discuss the terms of your accidental disappearance from the firm's board. You're going to sign over the house to Tamara, and you're going to take a long, quiet sabbatical in Europe. If you do that, Masha never has to know her father is a criminal. Tamara nodded approvingly from the corner. It's for the best, Viktor. You were always too soft for this world. Let us handle the heavy lifting. I looked at the two of them, the women I had loved and protected, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel shock. The heat of my anger had burned away, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. They thought they had designed a perfect trap, but they forgot one thing. I was the one who drew the plans. I knew how to find the flaws in any structure, even one built on lies. I slowly lowered my phone. Elena's smirk returned, wider this time. That's a good boy, she cooed. Now, let's talk about the house. No, I said, my voice now as level and cold as hers. Let's talk about the fact that this apartment has a very high-quality smart intercom system. Elena's smirk flickered. What? The developer of this building is a friend of mine, I said, gesturing to the small black box mounted near the door. He uses my firm for all his security integration. I didn't just use a key to get in here, Elena. I used an override code that activated the emergency broadcast mode. Every word we've said for the last 10 minutes hasn't just been heard by me. I pointed to my phone. I wasn't on the phone app. I was on the HomeSync dashboard. The audio is being recorded to 3 different secure servers, I said. And since I marked this as an active burglary in the system, the local precinct has been listening to a live feed of your confession for exactly 6 minutes. They should be pulling into the parking lot, right about now. As if on cue, the distant, rising wail of a siren cut through the night air, growing louder with every heartbeat. Elena's face transformed. The cool, calculated mask shattered into a jagged mess of panic. She lunged for the file in my hand, but I stepped back, my movement fluid and precise. You bastard! She screamed, her voice hitting a glass-shattering register. You'll ruin everything! I'll tell them you forced me! I'll tell them you're crazy! Tell them whatever you want, I said, feeling a strange, hollow sense of peace as the blue and red lights began to pulse against the window blinds. But the foundation is gone, Elena, and you're the only ones left inside the building. The screaming started when the first heavy boot hit the hallway floor. Elena's composure didn't just crack, it disintegrated into a shrill, hysterical desperation. She lunged for me, her manicured nails raking across my forearm, but I didn't flinch. The pain was superficial, a mere scratch compared to the systematic carving she had done to my life. I watched her with a detachment that surprised me. The woman I had loved was a ghost, a fiction I had co-authored with my own naivety. This person in front of me was simply a structural defect that needed to be removed. "Viktor, please!" she wailed as the door was kicked open. "I was scared. My mother made me do it. She pressured me." Tamara, who had been retreating into the shadows of the kitchenette, turned on her daughter like a cornered viper. "You ungrateful brat! It was your idea to stage the robbery. You wanted that designer kitchen in the city." The police officers swarmed the room, their voices a sharp, rhythmic bark that cut through the domestic spat. I stepped back, holding the black file to my chest like a shield. I handed it to a grim-faced detective named Miller, a man I had called an hour before I ever left my house. "The offshore account details are on page 12, I said, my voice eerily calm. "The confession regarding the insurance fraud from 3 years ago starts at the 6-minute mark on the digital recording. And detective, you'll want to check the lining of my laptop bag in my car. My wife mentioned she planted something there tonight. I'd like it processed for her fingerprints immediately." Elena's face went a sickly shade of gray. The threat she had tried to use to bury me, the habit she had fabricated, was now the final nail in her own coffin. By admitting the plant existed, she had provided the motive and the method for her own undoing. The next few hours were a blur of cold rooms and bright lights. I sat in the precinct, drinking bitter coffee, while my lawyer, a man who had been my father's closest friend, sat beside me. He had spent the night freezing our joint accounts and filing for an emergency injunction to prevent any further transfer of business assets. "They're both talking, Viktor," he told me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Elena is trying to trade Tamara for a lighter sentence. Tamara is claiming Elena has a personality disorder. It's a race to see who can betray the other faster. It's ugly." "It's honest," I replied. "For the first time in 12 years, they're showing their true faces." The retribution was swift and clinical. The Star of Sophia was recovered from Maria, the cleaner, who turned out to be an unwilling participant, threatened by Elena with deportation if she didn't hold on to the piece. Maria became the state's star witness. The insurance company, eager to reclaim their payout, filed a massive civil suit that stripped Elena and Tamara of every cent they had managed to squirrel away in the Caymans. Because the fraud involved interstate and international wire transfers, the federal authorities stepped in. Tamara, at 65, was facing a decade behind bars. Elena, the architect of my misery, was sentenced to 12 years. The private apartment on 4th Street was liquidated to pay back my firm's stolen proprietary funds. But the real transformation happened within the walls of my own home. For weeks, I couldn't stand the smell of lilies. I had the entire house professionally cleaned, the guest house demolished, and the garden replanted with wild, untamed roses and lavender. I spent hours with Masha, sitting on the floor of her room, explaining that the bad men from 3 years ago were gone forever, and that her mother had gone away because she had lost her way. It was a gentle version of a harsh truth, but for the first time, Masha started sleeping through the night. One afternoon, 6 months later, I was standing on the cedar deck I had designed when we first married. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn, where Masha was chasing a golden retriever puppy we had recently adopted. The air was crisp and smelled of rain and earth. No vanilla, no lilies. I opened a small velvet box I had picked up from the police evidence locker that morning. The Star of Sophia sat nestled in the fabric, its blue depths catching the dying light. I looked at the heart-shaped nick on the bottom prong. My mother had worn this with pride, believing it represented the endurance of family. I didn't feel the urge to put it back in a safe. Instead, I drove to the City Museum the next day. I met with the curator of the jewelry wing and signed the deed of gift. "It's a magnificent piece, Mr. Volkov," the curator said, polishing his glasses. "Are you sure you want to part with it? It's a family heirloom." "A house isn't a home because of what's hidden in the safe," I told him, looking at my reflection in the glass display case. I looked older, perhaps, but the lines around my eyes weren't from strain anymore. They were from the clarity of a man who had survived a collapse. "It's a heirloom of a life that no longer exists. I'd rather it be somewhere where its only job is to be beautiful, not a motive for murder." As I walked out of the museum and into the bustling city air, I felt a lightness in my chest that no blueprint could ever capture. I had spent my life building structures to withstand the elements: wind, gravity, time. But I had learned that the most dangerous rot doesn't come from the outside. It starts in the quiet corners, in the whispers we choose to ignore, and in the people we trust to hold up our world. I realized then that you can rebuild a house, you can reclaim a fortune, and you can even heal a broken heart. But the most important structure you will ever design is the one that protects your own peace. I drove home to my daughter, leaving the ghosts and the sapphires behind. A foundation built on truth is the only one that can truly touch the sky.